Every day we encounter hazardous materials. Most, like dust, epoxy glues, and even gasoline, we take for granted. But these materials and many more can injure or kill you if not used properly. This is another in the safety series presented by the Underground Contractors Association of Chicago, the Chicagoland Laborers Training Fund, and the National Utility Contractors Association. Pay attention and remember, you are dealing with materials that can be more hazardous than you think.
Hazards come in many forms and attack your body in many ways. Some hazards are obvious. You know that gasoline can burn you and the gas in cylinders can explode. But there are others, like dust and asbestos, that take longer to build up but can cripple and kill. HazCom is a program to inform you of the hazardous materials you may come in contact with. You have the right to know, so listen up.
OSHA requires that your employer provide you with information and training regarding hazardous materials in your work area at the time of your job assignment. Information includes the location and availability of the written HazCom program, the list of hazardous chemicals present at the job site, and MSDS, material safety data sheets that explain each hazardous material. Your training must include methods and observations used to detect the presence or release of any hazardous material in the work area, the physical and health dangers involved, and measures you should take to protect yourself. Your employer is required to maintain a list of hazardous materials used or stored on the job site for your review. The list must be updated as necessary whenever new materials are brought to the site. It is important that you check the list regularly. Remember that the product name on the list must be the same as the name on the container and the corresponding MSDS available at the job site. Before you start work, make sure you know the dangers involved. Hazards can be in the form of solids, liquids, or gases. These gas cylinders are a good example, but other hazards are not so obvious, such as minute particles inhaled when sawing concrete or ductile iron pipe. Gases and vapors can vary. Some, like sewer gas, are heavier than air and can create deadly pockets. Others can mix with and behave like air. Gasoline vapor may travel 100 feet to an ignition source in just seconds. Liquids can be corrosive materials that burn or irritate, such as creosote. Toxic materials, such as epoxy, can damage tissue, cause severe illness, even death, when inhaled, ingested, or absorbed through the skin. Reactive materials like galvanized pipe undergo changes when cut with a torch and release poisonous, toxic, or corrosive byproducts that can affect you many hours later. Some materials can take more than one form. Gasoline gets little respect in use or in handling, and yet it is highly flammable and explosive as a liquid and as gaseous vapor. Hazardous materials enter the body in three ways, called routes of exposure. They are inhalation, ingestion, and absorption. The most common is inhalation, breathing materials into your lungs. Ingestion is the swallowing of hazardous materials. Do not eat, drink, or use tobacco products where hazardous materials are being used. Always eat meals in a safe area, and make sure you wash before you eat. Absorption is the entry of hazardous materials through the skin, where it can enter the bloodstream and be carried to vital organs. It is also important that you know the difference between a physical and a health hazard. Physical hazards cause direct injuries, such as explosions, fires, acid burns, etc. For example, this gas cylinder, handled improperly, could become a lethal missile. Health hazards affect your body and its ability to function properly. These hazards can irritate skin, eyes, or mucous membranes, damage internal organs such as liver, kidneys, and lungs. Damage can occur over a short period of time or develop years later, depending on the hazardous material and the length and frequency of exposure. When you have identified the hazards at your job site, you must be able to read and understand the material safety data sheet. If you cannot read or do not read English, ask your foreman to explain the hazards to you. Your employer is required to have an MSDS available on site for every hazardous material used or stored on that job site. Section 1 identifies the material, provides the name and address of the manufacturer, and emergency phone numbers. Section 5 provides information on how the material may react or change. The next 3 sections are the most important to you. Section 6 describes how the material can hurt you and what first aid procedures to follow if injured. Section 7 provides precautions to be taken when handling or using material. And Section 8 gives you information on protective equipment to be worn when using the material. Special labels may be used by your employer when hazardous materials are broken down from bulk to smaller containers used on the job site. These labels provide important information for your safety, such as physical and health hazards, flammability, reactivity, and the protective equipment you need to work with the material. The use of certain protective equipment, such as this respirator, may vary according to job site, ventilation, and weather conditions. Check your MSDS or ask your foreman. It is your responsibility to make sure you have and use the protective equipment recommended on special labels and your job site MSDS. There are also hazardous materials which do not come in a can. The dirt and dust encountered at all excavation sites, raw sewage encountered in active manholes, and methane gas uncovered in trenching operations. These are natural hazardous materials, and you must be aware of them. Whatever the situation, if you are not sure, ask your foreman, supervisor, or safety director. If a label is missing or not readable, notify the appropriate person.
Hey! No label on this one.
No label, Dan?
No.
Well, without a label, we can't use it, so let's go in the shop. We'll find ourselves a new one.
All right.
If you don't know how to use protective equipment, find out. You have the right to know what hazards you will be asked to work around, so don't be afraid to ask questions. The answers may save your life. Let's review. Rule number 1, follow your employer's HazCom program. Rule 2, check hazard materials list regularly. 3, identify hazards before starting work. Rule 4, remember the routes of exposure. 5, know the difference between physical and health hazards. Rule number 6, read and understand MSDS. 7, know the container labeling system. Rule 8, use proper protective equipment. 9, be aware of natural hazardous materials. And Rule 10, don't be afraid to ask questions.